Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Dennis Faber, former director and buyer for Gander Mountain Outdoors. Thank you for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad to be here.
When did you start at Gander Mountain?
I started in 1970. Gander Mountain started in 1960. And they grew to a little over $2 million in sales and built a new facility just outside of Wilmot, Wisconsin, here in Kenosha County. And that's when I joined them in 1970. I came from JCPenney Company.
Okay, when did you work for JCPenney?
Well, I went to school here in Kenosha and I got an associate degree in marketing, and it was probably 1967, 68 is when from 68 to 70 with 67 to 70 with JCPenney Company.
Okay, and what did you do for them?
I was in the management training program, and the first department that I had was infants and girls department. It was quite an education. And I transferred to a store. I was at the Point Loomis Shopping Center off of Highway 41 or 27th Street. And that store accomplished $3 million in sales on December 13th, 1968, I think it was. And then I transferred was promoted to a store in downtown Waukesha. And that store was an older store, and Kmart was opening up just 15 minutes away, and Penny's was worried that store was going to be affected dramatically. And a couple of other fellows I worked with came from Minnesota, and we actually did more business and made more money in that store the couple of years that I was there than it had ever done before. But Penny's had as you worked up the ladder, you transferred to other stores, and it seemed that the personnel from Wisconsin would go to Minnesota, and the Minnesota people were coming to Wisconsin. And I sat on a Gander Mountain catalog on a fishing trip in Minnesota, and one of my uncles explained to me what Gander Mountain was all about, and I said, hey, this looks interesting. I'm going to go talk to them, see if they need some help.
All right, so you got back home from your fishing trip.
Right.
And you went to...
Yeah, I was in Milwaukee, was going to get transferred, I felt, to Minnesota, and I thought I wanted to stay closer to my family and home, and I went over to Gander Mountain, and the cold call. I just interviewed with one of the executives there at that time, and told them what I could do, and I'd be interested if they had an opening. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from them, and they wanted me to come and talk to the owner, and I did. And they offered me a job, and I left Penny's and then moved back to that area and became a buyer for Gander Mountain. I bought all the soft goods. I bought everything except guns and ammo. We didn't really have much in fishing at that time. The company started in 1960 by Mr. Robert Sturgis. He was raised in Winnetka, Illinois, went to private schools. One of his schoolmates was a fellow by the name of Sears from the Sears Roebuck Company. He was in the Army Air Force in the Second World War, but he shuttled planes in the United States. He was always an avid hunter and outdoorsman, and he worked for Marshall Fields. He was the department head for decorating, interior decorating. He was creative, engineer background, and there was a gun club in Wilmot called the Gander Mountain Gun Club, and he belonged to that. And originally, his intentions were to buy real estate in Wilmot and develop it as a Long Grove, Illinois. If you're familiar with Long Grove, their shops, their gift shops, and their restaurants. That was his primary goal. And that didn't work out. So with his interest in outdoor
did he do this alone? Did he decide?
Yeah, he did it all by himself, but his first employee was a gunsmith from Marshall Fields, and Mr. Al Melka. He was employee number one, and the two of them together then went into the wholesale business, selling reloading equipment, bullets that would be metallic, the rifle and pistol bullets, and shot shell equipment and things like that.
Right,
And
but they didn't have a store at that time.
No, they called on dealers, is what it was. And in 1968, the federal government passed a law that you couldn't sell guns through the mail anymore. As we all know, in 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated. After Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was shot, and anyways, laws changed, and so that really affected their business. And what they did was put together a catalog made up of the brochures of the products from the companies that they bought their goods from.
And that's how they
Got
started
mail
their
order.
business.
That's how they started mail order. Okay. And the first mailing list, the federal firearms licensees. If you want to deal in guns, you got a federal firearms license, and they got that list, and they mailed those catalogs to those people, and they got the excellent return on that mailing, and that's what catapulted them into the catalog business.
Okay, so then because of this federal law, they decided they needed to have a store to do their business.
Well, they didn't still have a store. They were still primarily mail order. I mean, the company was 98% mail order, and when I joined them. And at that time, we had just one catalog is what we printed. That very first year I was with them, it was one catalog for the whole year. I thought, boy, this is really, really a simple job. Anyways, as it progressed, we went to more catalogs and selected. My job was to develop other categories of merchandise that our customers would hopefully be interested in. So I expanded things like the cutlery department, the archery department, the camping department, and the cutlery department is just some of the areas that I had. Optical was another one. And to grow those categories and select items to put in a catalog. And that was an awful lot of fun. It was a very neat, wonderful job to be able to select items, develop a catalog page, feature an item on there. We became the number one seller of a buck knife called the Folding Hunter, for example. It's the 110 Folding Hunter. We sold more than anybody in the country. Kaufman Footwear out of Canada with their sorrel boots. We were the number one seller of that product. Milton Shirt Company with chamois shirts, and I worked with that company. It was an old company. Made wool pants, and that the loggers wore them, and it was famous for that. But that industry had fallen off, and their sales had slumped. But we developed their chamois shirt line, and for men and women, and a variety of colors, and it just brought that company back to life. So those are the kind of things that were a lot of fun in the categories that I.
Okay. And so then they opened a store in Wilmot.
What happened is that the owner's son, I'll call him Bob Sturgis. The owner was Mr. Sturgis, Robert Sturgis, because he was the third and his son has got the same name, so he's the fourth, but to make it easier, I'll just call Bob. And Bob and I were 20 days apart on our birthday. had similar backgrounds. I had an associate degree in marketing from KTI. Bob graduated from Northern Illinois University in business, and we had some of the same handbooks that we. So we had a similar background, and he came from Osco Drug, and he had some neat responsibilities with Osco, and he played a big part in opening up some of their new stores, Jewel Osco. And when he joined Gander, it made a big difference in the direction of the company. And he was, along with myself, felt that we should expand the retail possibilities. And in fact, the other buyer, Bill Hoffman, who bought the guns and ammo, and Bob and myself, we flew to Aspen to surprise his dad, who was there skiing, to tell them that we were going to put up the seed money to open up a retail store. And in any event, we ended up opening up a 10,000 square foot store in Wilmot, designed it, Bob and I primarily, hired and trained the employees and knowledgeable of the products. And
What year was that?
1976.
That's when the first store was.
That was that first store, 10,000 square foot. And we did $4 million in sales in 1976 dollars in that 10,000 square foot store. So phenomenally successful.
And what was the mail order profit or sales?
Mail order at that time, maybe 15 million.
Okay.
So between the two, there were 19. That was, as I mentioned, what happened in the 60s. And we had Johnson as the president, and then you had Nixon, and then Gerald Ford, and then the gentleman,
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter. But interest rates skyrocketed, and the catalog expense, printing costs virtually doubled for the catalogs. Paper costs went way up. We bought the ink separately, and the postage also doubled. So it was getting very, very expensive. The catalog was at that time, and so we expanded the retail, and eventually we opened another store.
A second store.
A second store in Wauwatosa.
And when was that?
That would have been 1978. And in 12 months, that store did $6 million in sales. It was 29,000 square feet. It had a 9,000 square foot warehouse. It was connected to a Target store. And again, that store did very well. We knew what the overhead was. Not like the mail order where things were, you were surprised all the time. Okay, this costs more and that postage costs more. But we knew what the overhead was in the retail store, and that store in its first 12 months did $6 million in sales. So between the two retail stores at that time, we were doing $10 million in 1978.
Okay, and who was the competition at that time?
At that time, the competition was Cabela's, and Bass Pro started in 1972. That's very interesting, but Bass Pro's the leader today. I'm sure people recognize or know who they are as far as hunting and fishing and boating. And they're headquartered in Springfield, Missouri. And Mr. Johnny Morris owns that company. And his dad had liquor stores. And the margin on liquor is very slim, and it is in sporting goods too. And Johnny was quite a fisherman and liked to hunt, and he started selling fishing equipment or tackle in his dad's liquor stores. And he was pretty controversial at first in the industry because his prices were so low. And I think that psychology came from the low margins that you made in in the liquor, and that's where he sold these items. And it was quite a talk throughout the industry that he's, you know, cheaper than everybody else. How can he do business on those kinds of margins? Cabela's was headquartered in Sidney, Nebraska, and they at one time were the leader in sales. Gander Mountain was the leader back in the early 70s. Cabela's was behind us, and as I said, Bass Pro was just starting for that product mix. There's other people, L.O. Bean and others that sell primarily clothing, but for the outdoor person, but for the hard goods and soft goods. And today it's Bass Pro is by far the largest.
So when did Gander Mountain decide to start fishing equipment?
It would have been in the early 70s is when we expanded that category with the terminal tackle and all that. And it's interesting. Your major retailers, such as a Kmart back then, they'll take the #1 selling size on a particular lure, a Rapala, for example, a size of #7 it's called, and they establish the retail price on that, and you've got to match that. Otherwise, the customers, you know, just think that you're high priced on everything. But if you offer a broader selection, you can make a little more money on some of the others, and that's what you find in a company like in a retailer like Gander Mountain, that they would offer the other items as well, and the selection's better.
What were some of the issues facing Gander Mountain and other stores at that time?
At that
in terms
time?
of running your business? I mean, how do you accomplish sales and keep track of things?
Well, today you could virtually run your inventory on your smartphone. Back then, there were no computers. We eventually got a computer in about 1977 at Gander, and it was in its own room, you know, 12 by 12 and temperature controlled and everything. But prior to that, it was very difficult. You'd mail the catalogs, the orders would come in, and every order would have to be scrutinized to make sure that the product number was correct, that the price was right, and the total amount of money was along with the order. And the last thing that would happen is the inventory was picked off the shelf and packed. So you may have your entire inventory could be sold because the orders are in process and you don't know that. Today you catch the sales when they come in, not when they go out. So those were some of the things that were quite trying to manage. Fortunately, J.C. Penney Company, who I had worked with, they had some inventory control systems that I was able to put into Gander and control the inventory far better.
Otherwise, you know, you could sell out of an item before you
Even
filled the orders.
That's correct. That's correct. So that's with the advancement of the computer technology. I mean, it just made a world of difference, and especially in mail order because of the processing that it had to go through to get there. But it was difficult, very difficult. That was just one of the problems. As I said, the cost of your solicitation material going up and having no control over it and what have you. It caused difficulty for not only Gander, but the leader in outdoor sporting goods supply at that time, and the oldest company was a company by the name of Herders. And they started in 1893. And they were out of Wazeeka, Minnesota. And they had about a 600-page catalog. And they made a lot of their own products. They made their own fishing rods. They made their own bows, their own decoys, their own snowmobiles. They were a very large company, and they were the leader at one time. They had a small store in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. And I know that that store did $1 million in sales in the late 60s. But they went into financial difficulty. Gander Mountain, in all the history of Gander Mountain, in the 70s, we were okay, but in the 80s, they had Chapter 11. In the 90s, they had gone public. Again, in the 2000s, they were in Chapter 11. And when Camping World bought them, they were in bankruptcy again at that time. It's a difficult business, but.
So when you started with Gander Mountain, and your Bob Sturgis is dealing with the gun side of the business, you were dealing with the other side, whatever those categories were. Was that consistent throughout, or did you find things to expand upon over those years?
Oh yes, and it was Bill Hoffman who bought the guns and ammo. He was these people are very, very, I admire them. When you talk to gun enthusiasts, and they talk about especially rifle bullets, they can tell you how many grains to put in a shell, and at what weight, 125 gram in a 25 caliber, in this, it's going to go at this rate of speed and what have you. And they live that information. They're just neat people. But Bill bought that, and when Bob came in, he had was our merchandise manager, was his title, and but he was very creative. He did some the flyers and things that we would stuff in our catalogs, and full-page ads that we ran in Outdoor Life and Field and Stream and American Rifleman. We gave away little things and incentives to shop with us, and that did a lot for our company. That type of thinking, and the way we merchandised stuff at that time, it was a savior for us, honestly.
And what was the business model for the retail stores? What was the way it was set up? What was it doing?
Because Bob had the background with Jewel and Osco, and mine with J.C. Penney Company, we knew how to set up the departments, and we just allocated areas for footwear, for example, and your camouflage clothing and your casual clothing area, and the hard lines, the fishing tackle, we allocated so much space in our store, a couple thousand square feet for that, and the guns were behind the counter. And but we laid the store out that way with our.
Well, how did you lay the store out for your customer? Who was the Gander Mountain customer?
It was primarily male customer, and something I learned from Wilmot, the Wilmot experience, with that 10,000 square foot store. I like to say in the middle of a cornfield, in a little hamlet of about 300 people, to do those kinds of sales. The parking lot would be full, and you could look out and see a deer in a field across the street, because there's no homes or anything around there. But it was primarily male, and they were in the 40s, 20s, late 20s. At that time, the demographics were up to the 55-year-old, and they would come from, because Gander Mountain was known because of all the catalog mailings. I mean, our customers came from Minnesota, they came from Iowa, they came from Michigan, and naturally Illinois was a big influence with our retail customers, because we were right on the Illinois border, and Wisconsin naturally, but we were right on the border. And it was, they would drive farther, they'd make 3 or 4 fellows to get together, and they'd make a Saturday of it. We had quite a few customers from Madison and Dubuque, Iowa, and just all over. It was an adventure to go. We had the right products at the right price, and 3 or 4 of them would get in a car or truck and they'd stock up with their, say they were shot shell or trap shooters. They'd buy all their shot and their powder and their what have you, the wads, and pick up their waders and what have you, and make a real adventure of it. It was a fun experience for them. And so it taught us and me that that customer will travel farther, he stays longer when he's there in the store, and he spends more money on average. Our retail sales at that time averaged around $60 per sale. And in 1976, it was pretty high.
When did trouble start for Gander Mountain then?
It was in the late 70s when the interest rates went skyrocketed, and it affected all our vendors. And we would put a catalog together based on the costs that we had negotiated with the supplier. That's another thing. When you're a good size, you negotiate your price. It's just not off a price sheet. And you get advertising allowances and different things. And but anyways, we get a price and then mail the catalog and have our retail price on there, and come to find out that they have to raise their price. So they couldn't honor their price. They're raising their price. Our margin's getting smaller.
Because you couldn't raise your price after you put out a catalog with prices in it.
That's right. And some vendors, they were affected so severely that they wouldn't ship the merchandise at the cost that you had negotiated with them. And others, there was one vendor that we had, their discount was in their terms. They gave you the cost, and if it was a 15% discount paid in 10 days, that was a big discount. You had to take that discount. You had to pay that invoice within that time frame because you based your retail selling price on that discount on the cost. So, okay. But the economy back then, it was said about sporting goods, they sell good with that in that time frame in those years. Okay. When the economy's good, but they sell better when the economy's bad because more people are hunting and fishing. It's not that way today, but back then they used to say that that's the way the customer was.
Okay, so was there any conflict between retail and mail order as things got later into the late 70s and 80s?
Yeah, I'm glad. Yes, there was. There was that was the demise of. There was a lot of conflict between the thought process of the retail and the mail order. Mr. Sturgis, he was a mail order fella, creative, copywriter. To do things in mail order back then, you select the merchandise, you've got to design the catalog page, emphasize what you think your best-selling item is going to be, have someone do the layout, do the photography, write the put everything together. It's a lengthy process. It takes months to do that, and he enjoyed doing that. Retail was different. He was not from a retail background other than the display work in the management position he had with Marshall Fields. And a lot of people don't remember that was quite a flagship company in downtown Chicago. And they had an excellent sporting goods department, even had an airplane hanging in there. But he was sold on mail order, and his son and myself could do both, but we felt at that time It was not the time to expand or try and expand the mail order. And that's what happened. Even though we had a board of directors, he owned the company and he made a decision, we're going to mail more catalogs. And you mail catalogs sometimes to build up your mailing list. Everybody who orders from you, when you rent somebody else's mailing list, if that customer buys from you now, he's your customer, he's on your mailing list. And we were mailing catalogs, trying to build that list, and that was not getting the return on the investment. And it became, unfortunately, a family affair where they didn't see eye to eye, and it ended up that young Bob and I left the company.
And when was that?
That was 1979 and 1979. Shortly thereafter, the company filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and a fellow by the name of Vince Shields came in. He was well known in the sporting goods business, and he had a very successful wholesale company, and he was up to date on computers and electronic inventory control and what have you. And he got control of the company and went to the Antioch State Bank and opened up $1 million line of credit, and didn't make any major changes other than scale down mailings, and took the company to its next phase.
Which was?
Oh, they went public. And then some other investors came in and bought it, and they took it private. Then they took it public. But the thing about the 70s, Gander Mountain today has grown. Even then, in the 2000s, it was owned by the Erickson family out of Minnesota. They owned the Holiday gas stations. And they were over $1 billion in sales and had 177 stores around the country. And but be able to save it in the beginning. I always say that companies are like life. You have your infancy, you have your adolescence, you have your maturity, you have your old age. And we went through that adolescent time period without a lot of computer capabilities, electronic stuff. It was difficult, but to be able to generate the sales that we did at that time and keep the company going, so that it eventually has grown to a company that employs thousands of people, and $1 billion in sales and more than $1 billion is something to be real proud of, and fortunate to be able to be part of.
So today, where are the remnants or pieces of Gander Mountain?
Well, today the company is owned by Marcus, the Camping World. His last name is, he's got a television show, Marcus Lamentis or something. I butchered his name, I'm sorry. But he owns Gander Mountain today. And in some of the larger facilities, as we had here in Kenosha, they just sell camping equipment today, the Camping World. The Gander Mountain part of it is gone to other locations. They even sponsored, way back in the 70s, NASCAR was becoming very popular. And I can remember proposing to the Sturgises that we ought to get on some of this. And they were reluctant to do it. They didn't think that was our customer, and it was our customer. Bass Pro does that quite enthusiastically with the sponsorship that they have. Cabela's did it. And then years later, a couple of years ago, Marcus from Camping World, he was sponsoring the Gander Mountain Truck Series. That was something that I got a kick out of. That it took all those years, but that is the customer base, people that enjoy that activity also, hunt and fish. So, but Gander Mountain is still alive, or not just Gander, I guess they call it just Gander now. It was Gander Outdoors, Gander Mountain, but they still have, they don't today, they just gotten rid of it, but a circle with a goose flying over a mountain. And there really was a Gander Mountain in Wilmot. That was that shooting preserve.
All right, thank you
Yeah.
for telling us the story.
Well, you're quite welcome. I really enjoyed it, and hope others do as too. Thank you, Carl.